This small, unassuming laptop is like none that ever came before it. It shone a light onto ARM CPU architecture that would change consumer computing for a very long time to come. Beyond that though, it represents every leap and bound Apple managed to make in the world of laptops since 1991, because every part of this machine is truly among the best within its class. Let's break it down part by part, starting with the processor, the brain of the machine. 1991 marked the first real Apple laptop with the PowerBook 100 line's release. These had Motorola processors with the base model clocking in at 16 MHz. These were very early days when the market was shifting at an alarming rate. 3 years later, Apple switched over to the PowerPC processor type. These were created by IBM mainly, with Motorola and Apple playing parts too in the conception of the chips. There were some glorious PowerPC laptops made by Apple, the PowerBook G4 family among the latest and greatest of the bunch. After an almost 12-year run inside Apple's laptops, PowerPC processors were dropped for x86-based Intel ones. The first Intel machines came in 2006, and they sported major improvements such as multiple cores and an advertised performance per watt ratio of over 4 times better than PowerPC. Apple would stick with Intel all the way through the 2000s, followed by the 2010s. Improvements such as turbo boosting, where the processor would boost its clock speed to get through certain tasks faster, brought 5 GHz speeds to the MacBook Pro in 2019. That same 2019 machine was equipped with 8 cores. This was big at the time, but laid several issues onto Apple's plate. Overheating became an issue, with Apple's love for small, quiet computers losing a battle against Intel's power-hungry processors, which needed bigger cooling mechanisms than they were ever given. The amount of power Intel's laptop i9 chip, the 9880H, required at idle was too much, let alone what it needed to power through video edits, for example. As routine dictated, it was time for a switch of architecture once again. By this point, Apple had been putting their own chips into their iPhones, iPads, and more for over a decade. It was time to scale this up to Mac computers. Apple released their first ARM processor for a computer in the form of M1 in 2020, with the MacBook Air among the first 3 devices to be built around one. So what makes M1 superior to everything that came before it? Well, its biggest strength by far is how well it performs in spite of an incredibly low power draw. Apple states that the maximum power draw of the M1 is 39 watts, while the Intel i9 9880H was reported to hit at least the mid-80s when at full power. Look at how the two perform in benchmarks. The M1 MacBook Air comes out miles ahead on Geekbench 6 with both single and multi-core tests. Yes, the graphics performance of the 2019 Pro is better, but that's because it's a bigger Pro model. The M1 is no slouch in the graphics department. Overall, that's how we got here. Apple Silicon are the latest and the greatest. There's so much more to this laptop than the processor though. Take the display for example. Apple played around with a few resolutions over the last 20 years. The 13-inch MacBook Pros from the unibody era had 1280 by 800 displays. These were far from ideal, with a pretty low pixel density leading to things looking a little low resolution. This ended up being one of the major downfalls of the unibody MacBook Pros actually. The MacBook Airs 2008 through 2017 had 1366 by 768 displays. Yikes. In 2012, Apple debuted the 13-inch Retina MacBook display with 2560 by 1600 resolution. This became the perfect thing for 13-inch MacBooks, and the 13-inch Pros continued to use that resolution past 2020. The MacBook Air line didn't pick that up until 2018, but from then up to the 2020 M1 Air, 2560 by 1600 it was. That resolution holds up very strong till this day. You can't individually discern pixels from one another, and the UI looks crisp as can be. The MacBook Air has a peak brightness of 400 nits too. Nothing to write home about, but plenty bright enough compared to other laptops. Time to talk about a very underappreciated part of MacBooks these days, the trackpad. The M1 MacBook has a 5-inch by 3-inch Force Touch trackpad. Mac trackpads are generally superior to those found on Windows laptops. A big reason for this is their size. For a long time, MacBooks had far bigger trackpads than the competition from Dell, HP, and the Windows laptop brands, and that was all there was to it. In 2015 though, Apple brought the Force Touch feature to their MacBook 12-inch and MacBook Pro lineup. It didn't hit the MacBook Air line until 2018, but boy was Force Touch a welcome upgrade. It essentially removed all movement from the trackpad. Pressing down as if to click a regular trackpad would activate a taptic engine hidden underneath the pad. The Force Touch trackpads brought pressure sensitivity with them as well, with harder presses activating a sort of secondary click. It's the sort of feature that requires trying in person to see how great it is, but mark my words, by 2020 Apple had perfected their trackpad game, and it's fair to say it's another area which the MacBook Air M1 is flawless in. So there's a theme emerging here. Apple took the time to perfect their craft in certain individual parts of their laptops. The 2020 M1 Air seems to be an agglomeration of all these parts coming together into one machine. Which other parts can we analyze in this way? The speakers, despite their tiny physical size, have possibly the best sound any 13-inch laptop can offer. There's no booming subwoofer present, but the hardware that is there is both top of the line and extremely well tuned using software. Sitting in front of the laptop gives you this feeling of listening to a much bigger sound system, or even a very loose-fitting pair of headphones. Speakers from the Retina MacBook lineup from 2012 onwards were where Apple started to up their game in this regard. The M1s won't let you down. Keyboard. Apple made a lot of MacBooks with scissor switch keyboards on their laptops throughout the 2000s. In 2015 to 2016 though, they rolled out the butterfly switch keyboards. They were engineered to have the thinnest footprint inside the case so as to save space and make the laptops thinner. The main problem this caused was debris would get caught underneath the caps and sometimes be unremovable. This was a significant issue and led to Apple offering a replacement program on many of their 2016 to 19 laptops. They finally fixed the problem in late 2019, offering laptops with refined scissor switch mechanisms. The 2020 MacBook Air came at just the right time to benefit from this, with the newer, better keyboard. Not only is typing on it as close to perfect as one can get with a laptop keyboard, but there's a fingerprint sensor on the power button. This unlocks the Mac very quickly and adds another level of convenience to the keyboard. Forget 2020 though, what puts the M1 MacBook Air above anything else you can buy right now? Well, at the moment, no laptop offers this kind of value for money. Apple's later 14 and 16-inch MacBooks came with huge price tags. You'll be hard-pushed to find anything under $1,200 right now, let alone $1,000. Almost 4 years may have elapsed between its release and where we are now with the M3 Pro and soon-to-release M4 chips, but the performance of the M1 in most tasks, I suppose with graphics being the only slight exception, is still very competitive with modern machines. This M1 Air cost $500, and sometimes they go for less. One other thing to remember is this. M1 was the very first of the Apple Silicon family. If Intel was anything to go by, we still have a decade or so of ARM being on top in the MacBook world. The fact that it's a first-generation product might actually be a significant advantage here, as it's cheap because of its age, but still very much a part of the modern era. Let me say this as a disclaimer. I'm firmly opposed to Apple locking down any right to repair we as consumers have. They have made their laptops of the last 10 years less and less repairable over time, and that is objectively a bad thing. If you can get around using an older used laptop or buy from a more sustainable brand, I'd encourage it. Some of us rely strongly on Apple's software though. Much as I regret Apple locking everything down on it, I do think we have to look back at the M1 MacBook Air and see it for what it is. A machine that has significantly changed the laptop landscape over the last half-decade. Thank you very much for watching. If you're a fan of older technology, why not join the Discord server? You can support my channel financially by subscribing to my Patreon, by the way, which is linked in the description. Probably the biggest thanks of the day goes out to my current patrons, who I'm really grateful for. That's Adrian, Oliver Wilderman, and Penny.